Buddy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sanje Chöda Soje Sonan La Janjo Bado Tane Japso Daje Chujen Jebe Sonan Je Dola Penche Sanje Chogara Sho Sanje Chöda Soje Sonan La Janjo Bado Tane Japso Daje Chujen Jebe Sonan Je Dola Penche Sanje Chogara Sho Sanje Chöda Soje Sonan Janjo Bado Tane Japso Chen Daje Chujen Jebe Sonan Dola Benja Sanje Drokola Shu Dayata Angade Gade Para Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi So Dayanda Angade Gade Para Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi So Dayanta Angade Gade Para Som Gade Bodhi So Sim Ola So Simja Tamjega to Topjalana Macheva Sanje Komara Chile Tobaja And the Chido and Janjus and Balajana, Twitch the Nazo Langkugri, Langware, Shingugri, Shimwale, Turko, Towale, Tijishu Manoa, the cause of power then, Geshe is a Juju and the Geshe something chat.
So we begin by setting our motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain the peerless state of enlightenment in order to benefit all living beings. And we know in order to attain that state, we must create the causes, and they are in the perfecting of all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To perfect those trainings in turn, we must have a good understanding of them, and to gain a good understanding, we must study based on an unmistaken source. And so it is with this in mind this morning that we are here to listen to a talk from the text known as the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by the great master Shantideva.
Because Minam Jumbi of Insa, that insa, and that Rangi Twin de la and Tabula Tujichim, Tomba Shaja to set up. Rangi Tago de Tincho Marking a Simja Tanja, Masa never use as a Kumbasha.
And as we normally do too, we can set up our merit field in the form of, in reality, our own guru in aspect, the greatly kind and one and skillful in means, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha. And all around, then also we visualize all kind mother sentient beings.
Tuga Honle Sepato, Mabaton, Shinrada never Ishiba, only the Jaba Gentle, Ishiba then, Combata Trevan, Tomba Shaja to be Naba Gentle, only Uncle Chula Machism, Migu, wicked in the stage. You some such.
And that the figure that we are visualizing is the one face, two hand version of Shakyamuni Buddha with the right hand in the earth touching mudra. And in the left hand, in the meditative equipoise mudra, holding an alms bowl filled with nectar. That he is marked by the three syllables Om at the crown, Om and An, Hung at the heart. From the Hung at the heart, light rays emanate going out into the pure realms, inviting all the wisdom beings and the empowering deities from their natural abodes. The wisdom beings come and dissolve into that figure, and the empowering deities confer the nectar of empowerment, some of which overflows at the crown, producing the figure of Akshobhya.
What the set up and don't be that don't be Kuson to get you and then Tenshi Bangana Takachi could work as to begin because of the Takaja Ranchi Batamja, Shetty to the Talija, Kula Tujichimani over Suba, Penta Mata Tamja to the baby there, and Chokani and some of the dungeon, and a bear, Tawetawa, Ijigitava, Mundugitava, Tunga set up. What that? Tranquilly give a check. What and it's some janky, and it don't not to comes from the subject that I'm and the castle Takaja. Take a don't not to tell it. Samlatane, Telemusebe, Ninja. And to make that tend to the water tend to get Java, to make it tend to be Ninja. What did it say to turn a comment? And it did to make them that there were times that were targeting Hassam Jet. That you got to do Jama to a silver, that the jet to a new weather Sula to San, that was to said they were subject to tool jet, Lamla Lab, Mombas over Sanjava. What that they come out over enough, KG in it. You just remember by me, but George, that to jet don't do my chair, your matter. Naranjo Danda, let them go at to jet don't do what a Kawakawa. Yagasa de Salang, Toba Tobo, Yal, Pagan to wear, and by Chicasso the Tujegi, Chatham to jet doing you to the Kabusha Chadi, because the Tuja come down about some Paranya, Chita, why should the Kenny and Kabato, that is Sanja and Yaji Chadi, and Sanja Goma, Tomato, to what Chigi, some channel. What did the Kubasha? Did the same kid.
And so we begin the process of really trying to, as much as we can, recall the qualities of the Buddha's enlightened body, speech, and mind, enlightened activities, the fact that the enlightened state has no fear of any suffering with regard to themselves, have no fear of being able to remove the suffering of all others, has worked with working without bias for all sentient beings, and with a how it is that we can really work to help sentient beings, knowing that we have to kind of remove all the different kinds of suffering of sentient beings, and finding that sentient beings have to go through all of these varied kinds of suffering, something unbearable, bringing up the concept of compassion for us, wishing to remove their suffering, and then wanting to place them into all happiness, bringing up the concept of loving kindness. And so it's kind of really wanting to carry that through, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free of suffering, and the cause of suffering had happiness, and the causes of happiness. May it be the case that I will be the one to see this, but I really can see that I have really, at the moment, not the capacity to do this for all sentient beings. But when I look around to see who has, it's the Buddhas, the enlightened beings who have that, who have developed the mind of enlightenment, on the basis of that motivation, trained on the path, and on the basis of that, attained full and complete enlightenment. And so it's from that state that the enlightened beings have all of the understanding that's necessary, the wisdom that's necessary, as well as the compassion that's necessary to really ripen the sentient beings who have not been ripen their minds, and to fully ripen those who are on the process of ripening their own minds. So we can see that as a beginner, I don't have that capacity. I just don't have the information of the different dispositions and personalities and karmic imprints and so on of sentient beings. Neither, even though those on the more exalted practitioners who are well along the paths and grounds to enlighten themselves, their capacity is still incomplete. And so we really have to attain that state of enlightenment, because from that viewpoint, we have all of the necessary information as to the individual's disposition, personality, their inclinations, their karmic imprints, and so on, to be able to prescribe exactly what it is for them to be able to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, and to happiness and the cause of happiness.
What is the conversation? What same general? What happened to the Katendegi and Tapchilla to the Jumbo to Bashaja Tuba? And Comshimangania, that Comshimang and water intention. That me you did shut and say,
and thereby, and thus we develop this mind of enlightenment, this sincere, powerful intention to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all, knowing that this comes from the skillful means the expertise of the Buddha who is speaking from experience as well. And so we must be particularly cognizant of the kind of situation that we are in right now, where we have this opportunity to listen to teaching from this great text on the Bodhisattva's way of life. But also from my point of view, the one trying to explain the intricacies of the text, that we are both in the process of accumulating very powerful merit. This is talked about in the texts, where it says when we have that kind of correct motivation, that pure motivation, that both for the ones listening to a teaching and the one actually giving the teaching, there is this shared kind of wealth of merit available. So it talks about this in the sutras, where it talks about the So it's in the Lotus Sutra that we're discussing here, where it describes the comparison between the incredible merit that one can gain from making countless pure offerings over hundreds and thousands of years to the kind of like the whole space that is completely filled with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That you can obviously there accumulate incredible merit by making such powerful offerings. But said even greater than that is the merit one can gain when one with a pure motivation listens to or explains any of the teachings of the Buddha. And so here we have this opportunity that both of us, with bringing a sound motivation to this occasion, have the opportunity to accumulate incredible, inconceivable merit. And in really, it's kind of like, you know, something that is really counts as when we talk about making your life meaningful. This is how it's done. and to use this sort of information of the benefits of being here to listen and so on, and to explain the teachings in this way, to kind of inspire the mind, to really kind of like keep us really encouraged and inspired. And that this is important too. Otherwise we might get a little bored of the information.
다 가서 뭐 잠 걸렸어.
Shakran guju go chuk.
그저 거를 거든요.
Yeah, guju go chuk. And 그때 워기 직대 니바 nyongmong shombe chetu zombe penyu lason.
그저 거둘라. 니가 너무 좀be chedo 좀be penyu la sumja.
Indeed.
어때?
Rangi Konchok.
올라서 다 레다 다 니와 녀모 다 갑자기 쉬셔 말이야. 다 니와 녀모 쇼베 체도자 다 배준 제와이나 아니 배용 가르가르 연구돼서 다 딜라 숨자 아니 란도 분조지 주 인베나 가젤라 서리바 서리바 셰드 분조 주 인베나 가젤라 서리바 레다 가제제 녀모 맞아 봐 녀모 게라 갑대 맞아가 봐도 녀모 매고 마소가 봐도 다 란데 부조 조바지다 현재 부조 조바지 용토에 걸어 요 말와 다 되네 이바에서 녀몽 갑디 장한테 아니 갑디 장한테 아니 딜라데네 다 란데 부조 다 현재 부조 조바 연구 유자 되서 란데 부조 조기 다 규차되기도 와 녀몽 봐 가운데 좋아서 녀몽을 구가 맞대도 되는데 란데 부조 규인변은 다 되서 아니 가젤 소지보다 소발이 좀 제도 하서 말아 다가니시 현재 부조 조가 두비에게 주인바 인사 근데 가제들라 가다 배전 잡아들라 제대다 강매를 동네 전에 대수지 소바 도와스들 좀 된도 봐서 다날 담제와 타치바 제고be 좀 전노스다 날 심제 탐제도 산제 고마 토비 토바 지기 있으는 셈께다 담자라 안 뒤고바데 타치바 요거데스다 사바다다 사만내신 두투와 제다 타치바 요 whatever gets yours.
So we have arrived at another main outline, and this outline is discussing the benefits of the effort that is necessary to put in order to overcome or destroy mental affliction. And this has three subheadings. The first of these is that it is reasonable and correct to bear the hardships because one is creating the causes for the fulfilling of one's own purpose, the kind of excellent fulfilling of one's own purpose. And the second is it is reasonable to put up with the hardships of overcoming mental afflictions because this effort acts as the cause for the fulfilling of the purpose of others, the excellent fulfilling of the purpose of others. And thirdly, it is the benefits of this kind of effort is that because it is necessary for us in order to bring to completion the vow that we have already made.
주인바 인사 안 된대게 안 가서 다 가져도 가져라 소리반에 매 자이 마쇠 되어봐야 룰라 견다 자와 셀제나 가서 안 가서 된체 주체 양다 전조바 달라 동에 지진 뇌제 인스.
And so to begin with the first of these, then, and that the reasonableness of really bearing with the hardships because this effort acts as the cause for the fulfilling of our own purpose. Now, verse number 39, it says, if even scars inflicted by meaningless enemies are worn upon the body like ornaments, then why is suffering a cause of harm to me who impeccably strive to fulfill the great purpose?
가서데 간제 되면밤 다 간제 지금 가서는 당문에 되면 봤는데 대문에 저 가서는 다 가자 문에 전에 하나 편토에 또 다시 쓰고 봐. 다 된대 이제 다 세디 아니 지금 또그 담송의 채도 다 가자 민기 채도 된대의 채도 다 가자 지금 가서는 갈래자에 다 딜러도 되면 어서 잡으러我到底是对吃不吃，我等于是对，俺탐제 겸방 타밤 탐제 캠백에 된딜라 샤바이나 아니 맞아 체디 다는 코웨기 된달을 제대 그가 다 되면와 지금 잡으러 왔다 되면와 잡으러 되면와 갈래 다디 그 장라 동해용의 주무투도 좀 되시고 되면와 찾더라 그도면와 지금 다들서 다들 되면와 야나 되 충중의 제도 체디 되 충중의 제도서 다 룰라 파르비가 다 가져 마자가 치마 이내래 야나 지금 랑게 갑대디 다 찍네 아니 랑라 지금 수불을 내줘야 중간에 아니 소소 파우인도 히로인도 저 파우인도도 전 근데 마다 다 지금 내가 중요해서 라 잡이 마스 때봐 하면서 디 중화 인노시 다디 되게 다다우디 견잡 중간에 디세 중화 인스 내가 소소 히로인도도 고텔레전 파우인도도 전 룰라 아니 괜찮은 시 야디기로 와서 자와 세와때 세와때서 동바 전화 받 개침부 야되나 전화 다 된침부 라시 니가 된 타침부 주의기 된침부 산제 주배 7 달러 좀바 주의세 다 되게 애니 배전 제고지 중화 인바는 중화 주의 디세 안에 달러 같이 다 소소라 문에 전에 디 동네체도 수수 깔래 잡아디 동네 근데 중화네 동네 근데 중에 지체 내제에 다 동네 근데 중에 된데 동네에 갈때 소소를 내제 차기 뒀어 내제 인데 안다디 동네 땐도 매바 차이가 다 간자 지금 동네 땐도 매바 차이가 다 간자 지금 가서다 다소로 차대기도 아니 어다 간자 지금 그 소소를 내제 말로 디 당도 랭고 제도 왔어 돈다 추는 매바 지금 다 하나 돈다 충중의 제도에 아니 쇼리 개체뭐 쓰기에나 아니 지금 땐도 되게 중요하게 단데 규된대지 체도 아니 소수 배준 제 디체도 아니 동네 당도 랑와텔라 다 가르잖아 당도 랭중고 말에 쓰고요 다 쓰고 봐
And so, of course, what we are wanting here is benefit, to do what is beneficial. And it's kind of like, you know, we must be able to distinguish between the actions and what we initiate in this life as to whether it's just for the purpose of this life alone or some greater purpose. And that, you know, when in this verse we're talking about here, just that those who have just kind of like an attachment just to the food, clothing, and reputation of this life, or just to the things of this life, and and it's kind of like really in comparison to the purpose of aiming to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, such actions would be considered kind of pointless and meaningless. And so it talks about here, you know, for the purpose of that which is meaningless or very insignificant. Here the example is that, you know, you put yourself in harm's way in a battle, and that enemies wound you, and so on. But you kind of like, there are those who consider that to be something marvelous and heroic, and they kind of point to others and go, look at where I was wounded. You know, pointing out with pride the scars on your body as if there were kind of ornaments there, gems to adorn the body. And it's kind of like, this is, you know, pointless activity, and I think it isn't easy to see how that is the case. So we have to work towards, for our aim here, our objective interest is to complete the purpose of both self and others by attaining the state of enlightenment. And so what we are looking at here is the great purpose of attaining the state of enlightenment. And so the effort that is required for that, if it causes some hardship and difficulty, it is for the purpose of eradicating all suffering. And so here it's kind of like saying, why would one be bothered with that? Why would the suffering of hardship, of striving for the state of enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings be a cause of harm for me? It must not be viewed in that way, because I must accept it in order to actually establish permanent happiness.
Ali chulo nesu shima gechimbo rete ine dile ge rangi nesu shed gechimbo rang nyomong ge shawang de juda maju nyomong de gen ge chigi yume de soso ha go de gechimbo shibu chadwa di yago ma shima na rangi rang ngo ma shiba chagi dwa rangi rang ngo ma shiba ina rangi dewa duwe da dunge se de chetu marwa ta rang ngone dane ge dewa duwe dunge se de gange besun chigi yore 강게 배전 지기 열때 이내다 교체주 가서 뭐 맞춰 봤대. 동네데 가리 연구도 대화데 가리 연구도 뭐요 가리샤 등어도 뭐 맞춰 마시면 온게 다 담아들 소소 뭐신 거요 맞다. 계속 쓰고 싶어 이나. 소소 뭐 마시면 인상 아니 소소 그 대화 줍다다 동네 줍 대화 줍다다 동네 방다리 신기요 말이야. 다 근데 이거 당고 소소 뭐신 뭐 소리 이렇게 nga mi nga lumba di de tam pen to mo do de dong rang nyomong ge xiangwa de ju da ma ju nyomong se de gari re digi gari jigi re di gyula yoba na so so nyoba ka de ge re anti kandes yong yo re ta di dewa dewa da dongme mi de ba yin ba yin sa nyomong di ong ge rang ge dongme so go to dewa so go to 동네 속도나 아니 근데 속도 다 네가 된가 가서 다 개치부잖아 하고 해야 돼 아니 네 야고자 심바이나 아니 문에 다네가 다 간제 저기 이제 세워셔나 민군에 차기도 와 뒤봐도 민군에 마찬가지 잡아도 차기도 와
So this talks too about the way in which, we are so kind of like really drawn to and almost obsessed with external phenomena. And of course, it's good to understand the environment around you, the kind of a situation around you. But far more important is to come to know your inner world. And this requires a really in-depth analysis of mental affliction. Recognizing what is the mind that is afflicted, and more importantly, how does it come to be afflicted? And it's kind of like really the lack of information, the lack of knowledge, and the lack of attention to these kinds of questions is what leads to so much confusion in our lives that we, on the one hand, we do not have the happiness that we want, and also we have no idea how to eradicate the suffering that is our lot. And so it's kind of very important then to really kind of start to really develop the science of knowing our inner world, mental afflictions. How do they come about? What are they? How are they characterized? What could be the causes that lead to the mind being afflicted and disturbed in this way? How does happiness come about? What is it that brings me happiness? And it's like we're going around without this knowledge, like we don't know, but we've got to recognize what's going on in our inner world. And so, we can talk about, oh, I'm a human being and I'm from here, I'm born here and so on. This is not the key issue here. This is not the most important thing. The important thing is knowing your mental affliction, knowing the triggers that set off your own mental afflictions. How do they come about? How does suffering arise? How does happiness arise? And sort of like this is the kind of subject matter for somebody who I regard as a genuine human being.
로다 pen 차차라 나라도 그러니까 구조 자기 뭔가라 디기 되고 요래 동네 되고 요 말에 디기 되고 요 봐서 무슨 구조 자기 요래 구조 자기 요래 이내야 답변은 디기 가레스 라바이나 오 무망고치나 디기 레스 그러고 오 참잠도나 디기 레스 그러고 강바 요나 디기 레스 그러고 된다 아니 와 앞에는 사상 요나 디기 레스 그러고 딱 인제 저거 된다 저게 아니 디기 뭐지는 저거 와 디기 무엇인 거면 와 디기 무엇이게요 말해 digi digi yor digi mo sing yo mar digi mo ma sing ba yesa ani mo zo kang ma bo che digi to digi mo sing ba ye dunga mo sing go dunga de gyue dunga chaba doje ge dunga ge dunga diga de mo sing go to an diga de lega gande sing do an di yu gar re sha an gande yong go do an di gande song go do an nyomo do sum yong dang an di gande yo da ze mari be yong dang diga de sing go do diga de ma sing ba ye na dunga ngo tomato na an dewa gande ngo chu re ro pe na 지금 댕두고 시 야고 시다 요근 데서가 디지 가르에서는 아니 뭐 망고 전화해서 가라고 들려다 참잠 전화해서 유에 동가 디지를 뭐지네 또 되기도 와 로아 디 요근 데서라 강에 망고 두가 가서 동에 뭐 맞으면 강에 두가 당고 동에 뭐 신고도 와 동에 뭐 신바 되겠다 아니 소소 뭐 신고도 와 아니 뭐 마신 바 이마이나 아니 오늘 전에게 동해 세야다 대화 두배 제투고면도 가서나 내가 가서다 두개 신지 여봐 자원에 맞아 얘가네 또 얘가 또 째네 브랜치 또 째네 대대보다 쳐기도 와 되게 매바 쳐기면도 와 이 매바 맞아가 양조 동해 망아 깨고도 와
So, for example, when it comes to recognizing, what brings happiness and what prevents suffering, because, we all, our very movements, every time we actually move is directed either towards happiness or the path of happiness or away from suffering and the path of suffering. So it's kind of like very fundamental in our system to want happiness and to want to avoid the suffering. And so it would lead you to thinking that would be the most essential question of life then. But it's kind of like, it shows that we have a complete misunderstanding of, for example, how happiness arises, because we place all our hopes for happiness either in something like money. If I had loads of money, I'd be happy. If I had a holiday, I'd be happy. If I had a big house, I'd be happy. If I had a partner, I'd be happy, and so on. And so this just demonstrates that we don't understand happiness. We don't understand causes of happiness, because we can have all these things and still not be happy. It's very clear. And therefore, because of that too, because of misdirecting our energy towards what is not going to bring necessary happiness, we're going to buy into a lot more suffering on the basis of that as well. And that's, we talk about in the teachings, it tells us about the suffering, the suffering of change, and pervasive suffering. And so I say, what is the kind of the purpose of all this suffering? What is the relationship of all this kind of suffering to our lives? Where does it come about? Where does it originate? And so we have to really start asking these questions, to kind of like looking into the kind of unsavory aspects of our own mind, and discovering, that attachment, aversion, and ignorance, the three poisonous attitudes, are actually what motivates so much of the causes of our suffering. And so we have to understand that as well. So it's kind of like on the basis of not understanding, happiness on the one hand, but we don't have that understanding of suffering as well. And so, we have to be able to kind of like have this understanding in order to kind of avoid us kind of following kind of blindly down the same road again, away from happiness and towards suffering. And so it's kind of like here, we have to be able to kind of like, really see what is going to allow us to thrive, rather than to kind of continuously revisit the problems that we have always encountered again and again and again, and we can't find any sense of fulfillment. It must be the thing that we have to be able to eradicate suffering, find a way of doing that, and to generate happiness, and find a way of doing that as well.
다 간제 저기 나라도 동네 건가 너무 쓰고 요바데 거 못 쳐봤잖아요. What over channel, and your more the candidates you do. And the dilatenata, no more mas menomola captain Machawaina, and did you do matter about the what over channel, but never channel. Never channel. And no more jump at Chola, Takan can't do better Chavina. Yavaina, and when I did the Yungurwa. So a pen also Chalajin, Gogu Yavaina, and the Chaladi. 다 총강 가봐도 쇼핑센터 가봐도 아니 먼저 당고 구글날 디자인은 딱지 지기도 와 딱지 아니 가봐 연나 대 쪽으로 와다 메시지를 전화 소소 잘라 거에다가 말어 와다 되네 이마에서 먼저 디기 고고 디기도 딱 근데 쪽으로서 디기데 뇽몰라 갑자기 잡에 토네 디기 두고 해지래도 와 뇽모 개베를라 술에네 규연에다 가리 여바이네 펜토고문도 수고 야보이네 펜토고문도 교축보이네 팽이 토모도 로전 쳐보이네 패도 녀모 개발이나 디게 용문도 왔다 가자 녀모 디게 랑게 디게 점고도 와 디게 매버 소고도 와 아니 디 녀모도 컨디션이자 아니 계단 컨디션도 로아다 어디에 전다 가자 지금 디게 셰베 토네 아니 바유 때네다 아니 저마다 시신 배주 당전에 녀모 숙초도 충도 당고야지 개점부 차되기도 와 get him chat. Then they invite that Narazo Chicaso Nomo, my Jomela, my shook to the Tanela, and I got to run Jens Shukchambu Yore, and it because I Kewang make Lenyung Onge, and it the Ongi Yimba, and Narato La Chicaso, Netam Mochon, come to the combat maybe Onge Kanga check it, the Kanga Tawatala, don't let Jack Wedge. Right, Jack Wedge, that did they jebe tone, and Takaja no more shook the language, and Namsinada, so said, nobody shook chat the Jodi, and go Ramameba and Nomoma Duege, Ramameba, Nomola Ranch and Meva Sotation Gurwa. Colela Boca the two to it, and no more, not to get you, Nomo and Nemo Mate, and no more get you, and no more get, and it was somebody dedicated to get to Marwa. Get to Marwa. Roa Penango, the guardians for another, someone was shooting Gayana, and so the said, I would get to Mudua. Sadi gets said the Sasha Dua. Never social Dua. And it's go Sadi shook Chunga Yobayina, I should have Mebayina, and it said it was Yaki to Dua. So to go ahead said it was Yaki to Dua. The minute Sadi gets said the Sasha Dua. Say I came out to what I didn't hear it, but that's what you are.
So therefore, it is absolutely paramount that in relation to ourselves, our own personal status, that we have to recognize the connection between suffering and mental affliction. This is so important in order for us thereafter then to really, with great determination and persistence, oppose the influence of mental affliction. And that if we don't, we won't be able to make any progress with the happiness that we so desire. So this relationship is not something that we can take just casually. We have to gain true conviction in the efficacy of opposing mental affliction in order to establish happiness. And so it's kind of like here, our best effort is required. And so when we do that, we will be able to kind of experience the happiness we have simply by the absence of mental affliction. And so it's like, when we desire an object, something that we want to purchase, we go through all the necessary kind of research on Google or wherever to find out where it's available, what shop I have to go to, do I have to go to the shopping center, etc. Then you're looking for the best deal, etc., etc. So when you have all that information, when you've done all that research, then you can go and purchase the object. Now, we're talking in the same sense of applying the same sort of professional kind of research into eradicating your mental affliction. And so we have to be determined, first of all, to be clear on the premise that my happiness is dependent upon the skill and the consistency with which I can oppose the mental affliction. And so it's kind of like we can say, I can go for, a totally fit body or wealth or anything like that, that this is not going to guarantee me any kind of happiness. In fact, it can well just fertilize my mental afflictions and therefore guarantee me guarantee me suffering and the destruction of my happiness. So it's kind of like really, we have to know in our own heart, really, what it is that is going to really bring happiness. And therefore, we apply all of what we've been talking about so far, the sense of conscientiousness around our thinking and so on, our behavior. Mindfulness and alertness, of course, are absolutely vital in this as well, to reduce the influence of mental affliction gradually. We have to kind of like really see that because we know our self-cherishing is so powerful, that we are very much kind of in the kind of habituated through the karma and mental affliction that dominates our minds. And so kind of see how it's so difficult to oppose that. And therefore, it's going to cause like a very much kind of a pinching frustration in the mind in doing that job. And so we have to be prepared. In these last verses, it's talking about being able to accept the problems that you will encounter in opposing mental affliction, the hardships that you will have to go through in opposing mental afflictions. But we have to be sure that if we are, consistent in what we are doing, we will reduce the mental affliction, that, we won't be under the control of the kind of of whatever triggers mental affliction. It's kind of like really we have to be able to kind of like do the very, very best that we can do in order to kind of reduce, with the purpose of fully eradicating mental affliction as much as we can. So it's like, when we are gardening, we want to grow in the garden, if we kind of like have nothing added to what's there, nothing grows very much. And it's kind of like here, when you fertilize the soil, you get lots of growth happening there. So what we're trying to do with the mental afflictions is cut off any kind of fertilizing influence towards the mental afflictions, and to kind of like prevent mental afflictions from growing in our minds.
National heroes in the in that dila dende kale jago marwa menta poe dende kale jago marwa re semge le tan che ma do semge ne le tu ma do je doa sheba kale ke marwa semge le tu ma do and karche semge le tu ma de se che da.
And so mental afflictions, we must oppose mental afflictions. We must oppose their influence in our lives. We know that we will have difficulties in doing that. There are problems that we will encounter in doing that, hardships and so on. But we know that it is for a greater benefit. It is as it says here in the verse, this outline talks about how it's being reasonable to bear the hardships because they are creating, that effort is creating the cause for the fulfillment of our own purpose. We're trying to fulfill our own purpose, something far greater to us. And so we're not talking here about, some hero, so-called hero, showing off his wounds, saying, look what happened to me. This happened at such and such a battle at such and such a time and so on, and I was able to vanquish my foes and blah, blah, blah. Really arrogant and kind of like full of themselves because but this is not. This is insignificant, in fact, meaningless, kind of like talk and action. So as you can see here that, but if there are people like that who kind of place that much importance on the kind of like showing off their scars, that why don't we then say, okay, I'm working towards an incredibly much more significant and beneficial purpose. Why can't I put up with some suffering in order to fulfill that?
And Taganisha, Narazuke, Munetaneke, Takaje, Mingune, Selma, Mitsini Tawaji, in the Mangeta, to Tato the Jeridua, Mitsini Tawaji Bayina, Mitsini Tawaji Bayina, and Munetane, Deve Yukarisha, Titu to me. Munetane to make Yukarisha, the Pang to Metala, Mitsini Tawada, Migi Namju, Selma Chagua. That remember, Migi Namju, Mire. Say me say and Toda me get a me shake your day in a me get a malwa dog chagidua. Cousin, they were to go that they were due to dashing your media to make you passing your money and me namju that did took to again never care about you get the vegetable machimaro and meet a malwa dog chagidua. Wrong. Than that the Combulu was one that long dog to do the chick by as one. Jump out the ninja that didn't yam Jamatona and was a meet me rescue or in a land of talking to do the chibares. Made the meeting in some of your mothers want that around one.
So really, this this purpose of really an in-depth analysis of mind in order to work towards happiness and work away from suffering by really opposing mental afflictions is nothing more than what should be count for a fully qualified human being. A fully qualified human being is kind of one who is analyzing happiness because that is what they want, and analyzing suffering because that is what they want to avoid. And so going into it in enough depth and dedicating their life in that way. So this is very, very important. We can see in so many other ways, that people have kind of like just in a way almost deliberately avoided any kind of analysis like this. And so they still claim that they're, aiming for happiness and to avoid suffering. But, they're so inefficient that they're unable to, fulfill the happiness that they want and are constantly complaining about the suffering that they don't want. So it's obviously not working. And, in that regard, Master Nagarjuna points out that, if you aren't centered, if your life isn't centered around, really cultivating loving kindness and compassion, then, your thinking can't be much better than that of an animal. It's not that much difference.
Langne doge do the chikwas. Chida do so the chida do so mang cheda kun to yorwa. Langne doge do the chikwas. Lungs stand up.
Like an animal, yeah, like an animal that's able to stand up, but that's all. Yeah. So, the only advantage you have is that you're standing.
But say on the sumo yorba. 야구지 제로자 미기 남들 차상와지 배주 땅으로 제가 막 세와라고 돈을 쓴 거라 이내 동중 잡아 균주 잡아 말이 다 밀어 누바지 요래 미기 누바지 배 가서 차상와지 배주 땅 도와 이나 다 잡아도 이제 배주 땅을 나가지 매 인자 잡아도 이제 라지 니가 디기 자와 이마 인자 다 대대지 지금 매바에서 딱 가서 우투와 저거 소리 가서 다 대대지 지로 지나서는 다 아니 배다 가서 다 공개 남주고 제거 돈 받 세와 돈을 숨고 열받아.
So this is kind of not really looking, as it were, disparaging others who are not kind of centered on loving kindness and compassion. It's in no way saying that. It's looking at it in terms of actually looking at it with a sense of love and compassion for those beings, because it's just recognizing really when we all look at it. We talk about human intelligence and that making kind of fulfilling the great potential of being a human being, and that must be like, to fulfill that potential must surely be to cultivate and refine the sense of love and compassion, and so that we can fulfill the purpose of both ourselves and others. This is the correct use of that great advantage we have as human beings, that human intelligence. It's not in any way looking down on anybody else.
Diri sanje resoje sanje saso daji dos janju sem kena ta diri ne sanje ri chasos resoje sanje saso daji so sanje daji to ani mi sibal le paton sta janju ge sem keba insa ta nge mi de mi gocho ba chasos sunda mi sibal le patos ta mi ngune de chasos sungo do ro ta janju ge liu ni be na ni ba janju ge sem ke ne janju ge sem ke ne ta ne ka so ra ta ka ja je semkena droge de la dire sanje risuke ta dire sanje risuke sus jaju sebe se chasus sanje risuke mi sibal le baton sta une tane ta janju ge semke ba yensa ta nga mingune de chasus mi sibal le baton tingela ta mingune mai ba sura je da pame kobane ge mi jigen yongda mi le de mingune de chamaso sta dire janju ge semkena ta mingune de chasus ro ka se mi namju di 다 현대 민자와 제와 인사 다 자주가 셈께봐 있나 아니 문에 다른 민문에 잡아 설치하기도 와 대승으로 데려와 가서 데려산제 리소체 가서 다 가자 미시발 레바토 데려산제 리소체스 산제서서 다 주도서 어디서 좀 찍지 마다 그냥 다다 줘서 다 데려래 어디에 임바자 미시발 레바토 지다 얘네 미차되어 때 얘네 다 미시발 레바토 쓰기더라 갈 거고 도서라 자주 그 셈께나 다 미시바 레버 도발 차기도 어디들 다가 저 어디 디가 미게 남주 세 때네다 문에 전에 세 삐딱슈도 배주 당는 차वर 와 아니 때문에 미친이 차와 차월다
Yeah, just again, I was recalling just the verse in the chapter 2 of this very text, the Bodhisattva's way of life, where it describes, having first then generated that the mind of enlightenment, where the author talks about, now I have become, part of the Buddha family. Now my life has become meaningful, and so it's kind of really a verse of rejoicing, an inspirational verse. And so it's really saying that, now I have become truly human in a way. That's what it's really pointing to. It's not just a question of, being born from the womb as a mammal known as a human. That doesn't qualify just as being human. But in fact, when we have recognized this extraordinary intelligence that we have and using it to develop this mind of enlightenment, it's the best quality life that we could lead. And now we have become fully qualified as a human being. So this is what he's talking about.
어디서 중고도 왔다 데리면서 왔다 되게 그래서 내수되게 먼저 씹었잖아요. 왔다 뽑았잖아요. 하고 봤잖아요. 아니 라니야 왔다 간제 소속에 가서데 자주 생배 되뇌라 먼저 럽종제 튀어봤지. 삼바체 고바체 오 개바 상고이 당에 미지데 jon다 잡아 차기도 다 문에가 민문에 친이 상화 좀 거라 더 되기도 상사되데 어떻게 돈에 아니 배준제데 개침버려도 와
And so it's saying nothing more that it's for us then to also to recognize the great benefits of the mind of enlightenment, to know about the mind of enlightenment, how to generate that mind of enlightenment, to study it, to habituate the mind to it more and more and more, is more and more making us a fully qualified human being. So the second of those subheadings talked about then the reasonableness of bearing with the hardships of effort as the cause for fulfilling the purpose of others, the excellent purpose of others. Verse number 40. If fishermen, hunters, and farmers, thinking merely of their own livelihood, endure the sufferings of heat and cold, why am I not patient for the sake of the world's joy? So here it's discussing how, different people, for the sake of their livelihoods, like such as the fishermen and the hunters and the farmers and so on, they're just thinking in terms of their own livelihood, go through so much mental and physical hardship, cold and heat, etc., for the sake of fulfilling their own kind of purpose, gaining enough to be able to live on. And so, and they know as well, this is day after day after day. They know what's ahead of them. They know the suffering that they will have to encounter, and yet they willingly accept that just for the sake of this life, making a living in this life. And so it's kind of like, in comparison, that we are working to attain the state of complete enlightenment in order to be able to bring happiness to all sentient beings. And so why isn't it that we aren't patient in the face of that, in kind of for the sake of that? So we're talking about the kind of happiness that is kind of for self and others, that is a permanent state of happiness. And so we ought to be able to have patience in regard to the hardships that might be encountered on that path.
내가 되게 당도래네 저되기도 다가는 아니 저기 리콜라 자기도 깔래 쉬우자기도 조선 전부도 앞에는 지금 네팔다 디발 시계만 뭐 리콜 잔 두고 조선 망부다네 리콜 잔 깔래 쉬우자고 여러분 얘네 다 민도 리드레지 깔래 마운트 에베레스트 간 자바스다 민잠 저와다 얘네 된데 칠래 깔래 되게 자기요나 다 먼저 지금 라신이가 된 타치버 두배 심지 탐지가 된 두배 쳐도 다 가전에 갈래잖아. 다그 된데 가서 다 가서 민감부터래 된데 에는 갈래자고 얘는 뭐서 된데 다 가전에 갈래잖아. 그 말에서 다구로 숨고로 다 되대.
So yeah, the kind of activities that humans get up to, like the fishing and so on, putting themselves, on the side of a river which is mosquito infested, and you're there holding a rod, waiting for the fish to bite, and getting bitten by mosquitoes constantly. They put up with all of that, or those go out on the ocean. Fish are putting their lives in danger every time they go out, and yet they willingly. Willing to take that chance, and those who fancy climbing to the top of mountains, go to Nepal and climb Everest, incredibly dangerous. And we can read about those who have lost their lives every year, and yet they're doing so just for the sense of reputation, to kind of have a big name in the kind of like mountain climbing world. And so it's kind of like here they're saying, your purpose is far beyond these kind of pointless activities. You are really working towards the happiness of all sentient beings. So therefore, it's kind of like it stands to reason that you're going to have problems in doing that. You're going to meet with hardships. So willingly take them on, willingly accept them.
아니 명체버져도 항상 그야 말아. 게세 단위 첨부 원하는 어다 닝제 다 미지 돌아단 것도 공부를 봐. 딜레 최년에 저 장주가 성나 초지 겨와서다 저 문에 전에 오 좋아하기로 와. 어다디 문에 전에 샘제가 된 두고도 삼자 좋아하기로 와. 문에 전에 다 명소사 대로 와. 문 된데 다 단다 리콜라자 칼레 쉬위 잡다 khara서 다 쉬위 제인 저거 여다. 직대 몽뱅 원래 민그레면도 Geshe tani chimbo ta ningche mizi chola tangdu ta chokayo re ningche kongurwa ta dile ta ngune te sem du tabre cheba ina nyomo le nyebo stemba ina ata kande yakore ningche ta mili chunga de goma choba chigito so ta tongma chagirwa choske mi do ta dango sana 정거 싫어 쳤게 말해 다 dire 다 이네 다 직대 몸배 말아 시부제 다 몸방 말아 시부제는 항상 그 말아 정거 싫어 몽바를 마시베 옹그로 그 신경 원래 야고 도 삼려잖아 빼야고로 마시베 원래 야고 도 삼다 시부시가 항상 그 말아
So then there's this tremendous kind of like epidemic of what's kind of like a worldly ignorance of people aiming for worldly purposes and aims and objectives, such as the climbing of these mountains and so on. And that, from those point of view, for those who are in kind of meditation on these same slopes, maybe looking at these people going by, thinking, how tragic that they're putting so much money and effort and resources into something so meaningless, and they kind of have a kind of compassion for their misdirected kind of energies and resources and so on. And so it's kind of like really kind of true, isn't it, really, that we can be so distracted into kind of wasting a life to doing what is essentially pointless and meaningless.
다 근데 녀모라 갑대자 아니 저기 잠니지 장주 그 셈콤 근데 제가 이나 지게배 몰라 개 초아 마죠 아니네 개 뭐마죠 봐 이나야 초지 겨와세다 제가 못 쳐그러 봐 초지 겨와세다 제가 오호 간사디 문에 다네겠다 지가서데 녀모라 갑대자기도 셈제 돌아 편바트베 셈께기도 서는 아 권하도 좋아하게 그러 봐다 권하도 좋아하게는 뒤 거에 들어 봐
Sula choake,
그래 다 별로 잠니지 장주고 셈고 녀몽을 갑대 잡아이나 녀몽라 녀몽 맞이잖아 초주의 개와세다 잡아 아니 권하도 오호 아니 좋아하게 그러 봐 미지 된다 대바치기도 미지 닝부 랭기도 서는 가와게 그러 봐 다들 과에 들어 와 에버타zen 지금 말에 가 지금 말에 코나도 캔도 그러와.
So that for a person who is genuinely opposing their own mental afflictions, they know that they will know that they have the approval of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions and their children, the Bodhisattvas, and that that is what pleases them. They will see that such a person is genuine human being, is taking the essence of their lives in doing what they're doing, and that should be kind of like how we say, that's reason enough, that's kind of joy enough for that person. They don't need to kind of like that practitioner doesn't need to advertise on the screen or anywhere else.
Yeah. what the you may that 가서다 녀몬을 카데 자야다 아니 녀몬 수춘다 다야다 잡아도 이제 거면 되게들 소바 제리 그래 최주변을 소바 제거를 그래 아니 최기 개개 녀몬라 아니 각자 제리 딜라 깔래 잡아들라 아니 고쳐버렸어 깔래 잡아대 고쳐버렸어 그도 와다 가르전에 깔래 잡니 그 말에 가자 깔래 강에 가자 좀 딜라 돈에 제리 그랬어 좀 제치 뭐 요랬어 좀제 매겐데들 두주 먹고 딴 것도 와서 먹고 딴 것도 다 단다 딜라 좀제 뭐야 요랬어 Deva inza oda kanjaje kale jabadla ani da kasada da kanjaje kale kajen jabri ki mari jabri ki was what is what
so this opposition to mental affliction, this effort to reduce the influence of mental affliction, the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion, this is all with the understanding. And that if the understanding that mental affliction in itself is the primary obstacle to our being able to engage in spiritual practice and to cultivate the mind, refine the mind. And so it's kind of saying here that to oppose mental affliction, the effort that's required to do this is justified, and it's meaningful because it is so meaningful. Therefore, there's a kind of there's a reason behind it. There's a logical kind of like justification for being able to put in that sort of effort.
다 간제 더 뒤바이나 다 간제 정가라 쪽에 저거서도 최주배체도 뒤주 땅에 최주배체도 장게 그자 제토바이나 다디 깔레 잡아때 고쳐버렸어. 깔레 잡아들 다 가자제 제부 돈다 템바 주고 요랬어. 딘데 임바이자 안 깔레 잡아디기 때는 소소 미리 깨봐도 고쳐버려 미 님불 렌토버렸어. 뭐다 디스고 다 디가 그 찍들 견주 지금 요 말때 이내다 님불 렌다 말에 못해 쳐도 딘데 처음에 지래 딘데 깔레 자기는 뭐라도 쳐요 받을 때 깔레 가지는 자리 그 말에 자 고그러 봐. 숨고 열 봐. 다디 디스고 디 뭐서 못쳐 봐 제디 개쳐 버려도 와.
So in brief, we really just take on the kind of like the vow of saying that in order to establish the Dharma in my life, I must put in the effort. And so whatever difficulties are to be encountered in doing so, bring them on and really take it on, because this is how I can really take the essence of this life. And so, this is the kind of ability to know what is and what isn't taking the essence of our precious human life. And so it's kind of recognizing this and being able to then willingly dive into it.
탈침바 제거에 김전에서 소소 담자와데 아니 거저를 다 켈레바데 거 탈침바제 중국으로 왔어 중국에 김전에 자war래 초주는가 타도베 좋아 녀모 레데와 담제 간세 다니냐 녀모 남레 마저버 다제 최자 미시버 마와지다 녀바 민스.
So the third of this set of outlines was then the reasoning, because it is necessary in order to fulfill the vow that I have already taken. Verses 41 and 42, the beginning of 42. When I promised to liberate all those beings dwelling in the 10 directions as far as the end of space, from their disturbing conceptions, I myself was not yet freed from mine. Thus, unaware of even my own capacity, was it not somewhat crazy to have spoken like that?
Yeah, 타요 동에게 나서 때 동에 나이드 가서 녀몽을 지기도 녀몽을 셔와도 교래 근데 타이바 막에 상제 타제 녀몽을 저와 게 지기랍 안 지기랍게랍게라 아라 녀몽디 셔와도 치네 데 빠엘에 배주 맞아 봐이나 다 처음에 줘서 봐. 다 녀몽 경문에 동거 요마를 정보잖아. 다 다가서 렌드 제네. 렌드에서 repeating 스타브 차브라 렌드 지금 소리 차버리면도 문에 전에 녀몽을 껴 통해 심제신 다 동에게 나샤 동에 나와서 제 같은 녀몽을 지기도 다 녀몽디 타야 막에 심제 타제 녀몽디 다 가서 디기 개개 최초 되셔 등에 타야 막에 심제 타 녀몽에 빠마도 지금부터 빠마 지기 있어 다 켈레네 다 ran nyomong xiangwa do je nyomong dang do lan ne nyomong le kye ma da je de ba yin na ta yo ma ge sem je tan je nyomong bang ge se da ga sa ka sa da kan da xie bu kan de da ga xie bu ma do mu ne chwa kan yo ma ba chwa kan ma da ko da nyomba ge je da wo de su gu do nyomba ge je da wo de su nyomba da cha ma da xie ge ba yi che ke yo ma ba ka ri ne xie si ge ba
So here saying, that when I recognize, how all sentient beings are suffering, all kind mother sentient beings are suffering, and because they're suffering due to the fact of mental afflictions, and that so when I take on the job of removing, freeing all sentient beings in that way from their mental afflictions, I kind of take on doing that, and I made the vow to do that. And even when I was making no effort to overcome my own mental afflictions, I was simply just parroting what I had heard, and I didn't put enough thought into it. And so kind of like this notion of, on the one hand, knowing that suffering comes from mental affliction, that this very suffering is the great obstacle to happiness and so on, and I got all excited and I'd say, yep, I'll do it, I'll accept that, I'll do that even when I have not overcome my own mental afflictions. I must have been crazy when I said that. I must have been out of my mind, because I wasn't even free of my own mental afflictions at the time.
ruwa da lamri na la shengi jyu tu bala rangi jyu tu ba ngo do dogo so so yi ba shero ba chengi shengi jyu tu bala rangi jyu tu ba ngo do dogo so ruwa shenju ge jyu nyomong ge jyu tu bala nyomong ge xiangwa do sibe nyomong le ta nyomong xiangwa ma ta de jyu tu bala sim jyu tu bala ana rangi jyu tu ba ngo do dogo gu res ruwa
Lama Tsongkhapa has said, that in order to subdue the influence of mental affliction in others, one must first have subdued the mental afflictions in one's own continuum.
What is what? Then is that Shendu Javala Toma Ragi Nomo Jongo Gures, the children Nanga Tata to Joa Tanja Nomo Leas or Joa, Jawa Sejig Jenga Kelane, Joa Chickens Kelane, Tamchana, Rangi, Gangi Zeta, Gangi said, Danija Nomo Namle Majo Barasa, Nomo Be Shawa to Juna. 다지 최장보다 소소 가와도고 메데 최장 마신네 요모 샤와도 치는 최장 마신네 아니 미셰버 루바이나 드레스 하와이나 아니 선제 탐제게 저도 요모 가서 요모를 줘와서 아니 제도시 마와지다 요바미 샤와죠 모들 다 간제 저 가서래 간제 저기 요모게 당고 선제 동에게 나수티 아니 모쳐 봐지 셰바체. อันนั้นเดี๋ยวเรามาสู้บ้างนะอันนั้นตรงนี้น่าจะการีกิจก็ตัว 동해 나서 동해 뭐 쳐봤지 와다 배나 동해 가서도 동해 교회 잡아도 제가 동해 되게 아니 지지게 때 제단도 뭐 쳐봤지 안 되게도 뭐 쳐봐 토네 아니 동해도 가를 때는 요소 어떤 녀mol을 때는 용 독숨을 때는 용 디야 다지 말이 발다 되게도 뭐 쳐봐 토네 아니 뭐 쳐봐 토네 때는 다 되게도 아니 동해 날 몇십에 니지께는 다 동해도 대화 때문에 예측이 있어도 아니 세네 아니 다 간자 저기 심지어 탐제기도 산재 고마도 토바 지기 있으는 거다 담제네 와다 되지도 때는 랑게다 간자 좀 녀몬디 아니 또 답제네 녀몬 초크네 끼기도 돼 냠용도나 하고 받제네 다 되잖아 녀몬 끼기래 되잖아 녀몬 끼기 말했으나 냠용도나 하고 받제네 아니 녀몬 말기에 돌아 되지 가서 됐다 지금 배전 제네 좀 받대네 아니 남신하다 간자 지금 근데 그 너무 온도 뒤도 좀 그러와 너무 온도 뒤 자주 아니 너무 걸어 라와요 말이 너무 걸어 라와요 말이 아니 소소 온차 차대도 아니 그 지제 추서 좋아도 용되기로 와 왔다 가자 왔다 되게 셰베 토네 되게 셰베 대인적인 되게 라이들 당고 소소 못 쳐고도 와 소소 너무想法도 주고도 정보도 뭐 맞잖아 뭐 맞으나 샘제가 되는 쪽이 샘제 탄데 녀mol을 빠와 지게 있으나 소소 녀mol가 다돌라네 대바이나 아니 그 직접 차두고도 와 당부 녀mol은 어트 아니 소소 녀mol을想法도 좋아해도 레모도 어트 想法도 좋아이나 아니 근데스 녀mol이 괜지기도 어떻게든 어트네 아니 신에 아니 다 가서도 녀mol이 깨마게다 아니 근데스 전에 끼고도 소소 냠용거 토네 냠용거 토네 아니 가서도 아니 데라 갑대잖아 소소 냠용거 토네 자줘르면도 뒤지도 강가 찍고 지장 용거 말이 미 캄다 매번 나서와 인자 삼로 단다의 지단 나서와 인자 데라 온게 녀모 깨당 깨지다다 녀모 깨당 미자어 요래 데레자데 냠용거 토네 갑대 자고 지러 강가 어 뒤지고다 뒤마지 심하냐 녀모 어때데 녀모 데라 녀모 쓰기 요래 다 녀모 깨당데 미 캄 민자어 인자 가시 데레자 녀모 이제 가시 데레자 녀모 깨원데 그 깨당 민자어도 아니 진짜 소수게 뒤깨다는 못 쳐배 돈에 아니 뒤 깨다한테는 아니 당부 깨제다한테는 바 까투 받잖아 아니 너무 숙촌도 당고지 용거로 와 다들 그 냠용도 돈에 제거해야 되면도 강가 미 강가를 집어지자 말해 너무 집어래 내 깨다 집어래 아니 너무 깨다한테 또서 민다오래 감민다 원게 용거도 미가셔라 배나 지 통화에는 직배주 당을 가셔라 셈람녀 누구도 가셔라 누구면도 찍라 누구면도 꼭 감민다오래도 미가셔라 직된데 배는 직배주 당된 누구도 미가 디야 셔마지라 데 누구면도 꼭 감민다오래도 통화에 가셔 디 돈은 너무 찍기도 같이 디 돈은 너무 찍으면도 꼭 감민다 너무 숙치종 계좌래면도 대삼을래면도 되네 용어 초그래 이내 또도 미 감민다오 너무 깨다 또서 민다도
So in the text here talks about, in order to fulfill the purpose of others, first of all, we have to overcome the mental afflictions in our own continuum. And so bearing that in mind, in front of all of the Buddhas in the 10 directions going out to the end of space and all the sentient beings, I made a vow to kind of liberate all beings from their mental afflictions and so on. And so at that time, I was unaware of even my own capacity. And so even when I hadn't gotten over my own mental afflictions, was I not crazy to speak like that? So here it's saying really we're understanding, first of all, that suffering itself is varied, and that in all its kind of manifestations, and we should develop the understanding that in terms of others' suffering, it's always to be that's something which is unbearable for us, and to be able to respond in that way. We can only do that by gaining a thorough understanding of suffering, being the suffering of change, and pervasive suffering, and so on, and to understand the true connection between these different kinds of suffering, and categorizations of suffering, and what causes them, the mental afflictions of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, particularly the wisdom, the ignorance of grasping the true existence of a self entity. And so we can, really kind of make that kind of vow with that understanding alone, to kind of go, okay, I want to be able to kind of completely remove suffering and the cause of suffering from all sentient beings. I want to be able to establish all sentient beings in happiness and in the cause of happiness. And I take on, you can even take on that personal responsibility to do that and make it the vow to do that. And so even so, we have to pacify, we have to kind of know that we have to pacify the influence of mental afflictions in our own lives. And we can only do that based on our own experience. So we can hold the ideal while still working to work on and reduce and eradicate ultimately our own mental afflictions. And so it's kind of like, this means that we come to know our mental afflictions in great detail, how they arise, or whether mental afflictions have arisen now, or whether they are, whether a mental affliction is not arisen. We have already kind of have got this, determination and store of effort available to oppose mental affliction when it arises. We understand the insidious and degenerating influence of mental afflictions, and so are dedicated to reducing that and ultimately to eradicating that. And so now, in terms of myself, now I can sense, I know mental affliction is there, present in my thinking, in my mind, and now I'm at peace. It's not there. So it's recognizing this and gaining a sense of control over our own mind, over our own thinking. And again, this can only occur through persistence and consistency and our own experience. So we have to oppose that a mental affliction at every turn ourselves. And this is still holding true to our vow to eradicate it for all sentient beings. And we have to recognize also that obstacles to our practice, obstacles to our practice are not the same for everyone, and that to understand that mental afflictions in themselves are complex and insidious, and they arise in different ways, and for us is to kind of start to really understand that what are the conditions that trigger mental afflictions, and to work on that level to stop the conditions themselves arising, and to be aware of that. And again, this is the job of experience. We can only do this by gaining experience, and mental afflictions are not the same for everyone. For some, when in the same company that somebody is speaking, and for one person, this may cause mental afflictions to arise. They may get offended by what is said, whereas another person, it doesn't bother them in the least. No mental affliction has arise. So they're kind of varied, and therefore we need varied means as well in order to skillfully oppose those mental afflictions. So in brief, what we're talking about here is the kind of dedication to the job of reducing the influence of mental afflictions in our lives with the purpose of eradicating them, and that we can still hold the ideals of doing that for all sentient beings just the same, as long as we are genuine in dedicating ourselves. That means that we are becoming professional at really knowing our mental afflictions, knowing the conditions that give rise to them, and having a whole armory of antidotes to be able to deal with the arising of mental afflictions when they do arise.
and the day in Insa, Ranle, Yomoke Chojoyore, Rangi Rotole, Yomoke Chojoyore, and to get the most water betone. And get a shetan in it, Namgutenda in it, the Kanjitone, or Jenshake sooner, Jamba Shishing sooner, some Majana, Yomoke Ngore, some water. And how don't the catch shoot? Guba the should catch more. Semjel of Guba, Zewa. Guba the Zewa, Kaze Yuvetsuke, Yomonde, Util Yomoke Chuma Yungore. Nyomo Kechunga Yungore. That Guba the Zawa Meabatan, and it's a Magawa delegation, Uncle Nomora Shigurwa. And then the Kochikasa de Simjela Guba, Simjenge, and Chikaso de Takaso de Takaje, Chikaso de Takaje, Chigi, Red Takaja, Simjenge, Takaja, Sachamu in that Takaja, Tigati, and you got a Jamba Chen, got you in a Simja Sachamu, the Ketchamu Sine. What Ketchamu Sine, Takaja. Dig the identical tone of Cuba the Zawachi. And how don't Kansachilla Gun Juana, and Kansati that Gurney Yawachin. Kansata Gun Yawachin, and it Gun the Matiwatona, and it young coaching Gun the Mavasodella, Seviatona, Cotisha Yungure. Yungure there in a Kansa Horara Zawa de Deva, Cuba Deva. Kuni Yawachin. That to get the Jeva in a chicken. Share up your draw the Chevatone. Namju that you have a tone Chevaina, and Yomo, and the Casa Gay Cook Nua Gurwa, Yomo Kuga Yuma, and the Jamba the Ninja Gay, and a gag Nua. What I did, what I did, Tapchika, Chasa, what the Chevatone, and La Lanka, Yamdo, Gan Dredge, Chasa, Swanchen. Roapena was a Kalaja Sawa, Kalaja Sova in a Kaladilla, and the Kalashimbo that Doachabo Yoela, Chaja Mango Sangurwa, Chaja Tiga Zobaina, and the Kalada Doachabo the Shibu Yugurwa. What I did not hear. 직탄 직 마잖아 오고다다 연구만해 고 차자지 참여 돈에 아니 고 냠네 제다 씨바 좋아 이마이나
So we recognize that we are denizens of a cyclic existence. We recognize that we are going to encounter difficulties because of that. We recognize that straight away. We have to really kind of like look into our own experience, I think, to find the right tone to take in life, and to understand that we have to be careful with the way we live our lives, and especially with around talk, to employ the mental factors of mindfulness and alertness constantly there. And so and know if mental affliction is arising and so on. And overall, it's extremely important to maintain a high degree of general respect for sentient beings, for all sentient beings, and infuse that with love as much as we possibly can. And the degree to which we have this sense of high respect and love for all sentient beings, regardless, is the degree to which we can reduce the opportunity for mental affliction to arise in their presence. And we want to do that as much as possible, not to give chance to mental afflictions to arise. Therefore, sentient beings should be precious. They should be vitally important to us. And especially in the sense of if we're in the company of somebody where we are perceiving a fault in that person, we must always separate the person from the fault. Where we have an opportunity to discuss with them in a safe and skillful way with regard to that fault, take it. But we always maintain that same sense of respect and love for the person regardless. And so, of course, this requires wisdom, doesn't it? And it requires experience. And so we have to bring everything, the best of ourselves to bear in all situations, in all our encounters with sentient beings. This is very, very important. To think of it like you're trying to cook a delicious meal. You have to have all the ingredients, and you have to be able to, apply all the ingredients in the right proportion. And when you do so, you get a delicious meal. So in this case, in this sense too, we could take all of our good qualities, our wisdom, and whatever love and compassion we can bring to bear. Obviously, this respect for all sentient beings, We bring it all to bear in all our encounters and interactions. And in that way, we can produce a delicious outcome.
아니 지금 알아서 지금 대세가 심네 아니 지금 줘발라 뭐저 견디 제원나 이게 줘발이 동거다 아니 딜라 지금 대세 줘발라 소소 닝지가 섬라거도나 다 닝지가 셈데 딜라 미베 닝지 셈 아니 마시나 야거래 잠딩디 되나 야거래 다 닝지가 셈 뒤에베 시베가네 아니 코라라 펜베 섬로 돈에 아니 지금 다 마티바시오나 뒤 제베톤데 매바 쏟다고 돈에 뒤야 아니 가서라다 뒤주 따다 뒤주 만나와지 right time 좋아 그 당가제 딜 때는야 바저 녀모 숙체다 줘야다 되게 차와이나 아니 거 줘요 말 마시네 좋아 변에 주주고 중국어 정말도 신신 내봐자 신난시 된다 카마다 대우를 쓰레트리보다 녀모께 오더라 라래 녀모께 현래 녀모께 규칙거든 아니야 그게 디 현의 편도요 말이야 그 잠디다 어다 편도요 봐자 뒤주 따다지라 봐이나 right time이나 아니 제외 돈에 제외 돈에 펜베 제외쳐다 나 가게 뭐도 김세대 말죠 코로나를 제외 돈에 펜베 쳐도 좋아 펜베 쳐도 로 앞에는 것도 서바 고바이네 서바 고 마고는 간냐 와라 깨그래서 팀 많이 받잖아 서바 마고바이나 아니 라신 니가 있는 그래 아니 코로나 너무 많았겠네 아니 그 년송을 줘야 저 코로나 제외 돈에 너가 깨긴을 제외 돈에 좋아 디 가서는 다시 가 서바 먹는 간냐 와라 깨그랬으나 지다 금제레 금제 딜레 개차데 심제 탐제게도 편바 주고 간사게 서바 마고마 이나 아니 랑자 말에 아니 진짜 마게 심제 디 년소를 주주 그랬어 서바 마고마 딜레 너바 잡아나 디야 너바 제게 너바 숙체다 주그래 교제 숙체다 딜레 저는 딜레 녀바사 그래 딜레 인사 딩년소를 가서 랑레 셴게 쳐왔잖아 네 서바 마고바이나 아니 랑신니가 봉하지 그래 나자 말에 간사 딜레 내 집에 그래 상상이 어디에 그 제외 돈에 아니 서바 검토 받지 저 앞에는 랑년소 그래 랑라 너그래 랑 겨와치 말에 너그랬으나 기부 중국의 삼로로 와 기부 전복에 랑레 셴게서 셴라 너그랬어 게 쳐왔지 어디에 전에는 서바 검토에다 되게 남자 지금 레온도 남자 셴라 너그랬어 어디 롤레트 왔지
And so, yes, again, the emphasis on mindfulness and alertness cannot be overstated. In the Bodhisattva's way of life as well, that Master Shantideva talks about a situation you're in where you feel that your compassion is on the wane, like when you're in company with somebody else or talking with somebody else, and that you're kind of losing it a little bit. He advises you then just shut up. Be quiet. Don't talk. Don't say anything else in the situation like that. And that also talks about how timing is so important in a situation where you might be in dispute with somebody else, and that if you feel that any kind of anger is going to arise, he said, be like a block of wood, just no reaction, and that's the kind of last resort, isn't it? Before you kind of lose it. So it's important to be looking at what can be the most beneficial direction to take in this interaction, and to proceed when the timing is right, when you're calm, when you know the other is calm, with love. Don't try and force the issue when the other person isn't calm, because that can only inflame the situation more. So timing becomes extremely important, and wisdom will tell us that. And so, and don't begin, to offer advice with the words like, I don't like what you did, or anything like that. You have to really see what's the most skillful way to open up the issue with. And so it's also the question of patience here. What is the priority? So we have to really kind of kind of like look at what is the kind of higher level of patience or higher attitude of patience that we must employ in situations, and to say, where others are kind of harmful towards us or offensive towards us or whatever, we might consider, what the hell, I'm going to react with anger, even if I know that creates the cause of hell, so be it. And so we have to take a much more enlightened attitude to why we would employ patience in a situation like this. Because remember that our primary aim is to benefit all sentient beings. And so that overrides any kind of considerations we have for ourselves or how our ego is being bruised or offended. This is so insignificant in this situation, because I am looking out for what is the most beneficial to all the sentient beings here. And so that's the bigger reason here. And you must always take this higher ground. And so, it's kind of like, if I have no patience, that's going to produce anger. Anger might lead to the lower realms. So that, aside from that, I must not even consider that, because what's more important than me here is the benefit of all sentient beings. So take the kind of our own concerns out of the situation, concerns from me. And I'm not the important one here. The other person is the most important one here, and therefore patience is so key to maintain that control and that patience of mind, because I know that if I lose it, it's only going to really harm both myself and others. And so it's kind of, that's only if I take that attitude, if I'm kind of like just kind of like working to kind of like patience in terms of the small capacity attitude. This is not what's needed in this. When I take on the vow to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, that should be the reasoning behind our maintaining patience in all situations.
Teacher는 갈래 때대 용거를 삼사 된대라와 매 구샵을 어 등에 때대처럼 갈래 구샵 지그래 때대 제바이나 안가 쳐봐 약고를 내그래 때대그래와 아니 야면에 두고다 가자 지기 소소라 남인거라와 매바치 디파 제바디 디 개와디야 가사 다가랑 파고와체네 가사디야 심제 탐자를 파고와체네 저부터 심제 탐자를 명바쇼스 안 저부대 안에 다른 소소 당사 유 강사 디 조주베 안에 심제 탐자를 저부대 명바쇼스 그게 개와지 사이만 개와데 저부 대달 명바쇼스 왔다 간제 저기 가서다 저부대 제바가 되는 거 같지네 랜다 남이라 저와 메긴치 왔다 되게 제바는 아니 택바 챔비 소소 제에게 최 가서다 편바 강사 제자바 지를 주바 임바 이나야 소소 제의 타입에 맞게 심제 탐자를 편토야다 내 장주선의 주바 차주도 와
So, for example, if we are engaging in patience, the practice of patience, or generosity, or indeed any other virtue, we must never kind of have the thought of gaining something from that, of getting some kind of payback for ourselves in any way at all, whether it's respect or good reputation or anything else, or I will gain big offering or whatever. No, we must really avoid kind of tagging on any kind of benefit that we might accrue from that. Even the virtue that is kind of part and parcel of a positive action we dedicate for the benefit of others. May this ripen for all sentient beings. And so it kind of like really see that whatever dharma we engage in, that benefit is immediately dedicated for the benefit of all sentient beings. So there can be no grasping in any way to it from our own selves. And also we're fulfilling the actual vow of engaging in bodhisattva action. This becomes then a bodhisattva action benefiting all sentient beings.
맞아. 근데 제발은 너무 깨서 고시부 가지고도 와. 되면은 소소 녀마 지금 편발제 야구를 제와 임바 있나요? 야고 제바이나 아니 저기 딜라 가서 랜다 남이가 라와 메바제 평바지 야고 땅 마도 와이나 아니 제라 아니 디또 소소라 메바게 바 직종을 남자 아카 얘냐마 코라나 야고 시고 제다 다코 미페 야고 레모도 세다 보더라 용구도 와 가서나 다 소소 레와지 카게 열었다 그래서 랜다 남이라 라와 메바제 바 땅 아주 다 디지도 또 참마자나 마티바 중아이나 오 다 녀마 국업 야고 지우 딜라 페도체 땅한테 국업도 메바차서 아카 삼사체 전에 교밖에 유겐치 또 마찬 마찬가지나 녀마 알아배 딜라 페도 야고 제 국업 중서 뺏겨와 선보 중소 다또 아니 또 참모 메바차인사 땅한테 평바제 국업도 중마소 다 이내 저마 평바제 국계 평바제 국업 중는가 평바 두비 인삼삼 어떻게 그 삼로 유바치네 다 녀마 녀 코라 야고 제다 미코 야고 미도 딜레시아 먹어바치네 그때야 소소 야고 제바티 셔를 먼저 봤어도 와 그래서 랜다 남이 레와 레사르와 왔다 되게 가서 소소 가리 제바이나 제바들 너무 그 국가 매고 소투에지 강투도기 다 배드 매바다 가서 레당 뭐 가보는데 이내 강투도 그 매고 소투에지
And so with such an attitude also, we do a great deal to close the doorway of mental affliction. And so this is very, very important. What's key, of course, is having no expectation. It's very important that we kind of develop this as a practice when we do engage in any benefit or any virtue. Because the danger is, that we have maybe done something very good for somebody in the past, and then we fall out with that person, and that they are now antagonistic towards us. So we have this kind of notion of, how terrible that is. I was so helpful to them in the past. Now they've changed their tune. They're disgusting. That is really bad. And so this is it's like you've just robbed your own virtue in a way by that sort of thinking. When you have no expectation from the virtue that you've done, and then you are free from being offended when situations change. And so it's kind of very, very important that we kind of don't have any regret for the virtue that we engaged in the past. It's rather in that situation, we think, oh, how wonderful it was, how fortunate it was in the past that I was able to be beneficial. I was able to help that person. And how sad it is that that opportunity is no longer available to me right now. But I make prayers that I will have that opportunity to benefit them in the future again. And so therefore you've taken any kind of sour feeling out of the situation, and you kind of maintain that sense of benefit towards that certain person, not losing any respect or love for them. So it's kind of very important that we kind of watch out for this attitude.
다들 인바이자 녀모세데 가서 삼로 동당한테 개고라 삼로 동당한테 개원데 아니 삼로 당신 마신 이 돈에 개원데 아니 거기 삼로데 가서데 최주배 튕겨라 저거도 최주배 개개나 저거도티 아니 가서데 아니 카마노와 제투바이나 아니 녀모라 아니 가서도 거 단지 제투래 다딜라 도나 마제바이나 아니 녀모라 단 녀모 생데 삼로 당당가 돈에 용 되게 저러면 심하 개요 말이야 삼로 당당가 돈에 용 되게 용 되게 치료 유디 거 유기 내단데 거 삼로 당당에 지게 녀모게 삼로 당당 지게야 녀모마게 받잖아요 최주에 튕겨를 줘도 거 네가 용 되게 네가 용다 다들 거 삼로 당당가 돈에 용도 거 가르잖아 녀모게도 가르치는 녀모게고 되게 남샤데 야고 심배 돈에 아니 녀모게 숙청보다 숙청보다 매번 쏟아지야 돼. 다 개체 먹고 삼로 당당 돈을 용다지래. 어디를 지제 어제.
So with the mental affliction, you can see how important it is, therefore, to develop this subtle way of reflection or thinking about what's going on in our inner world, and that to be able to distinguish between what is that which is in harmony with Dharma, and what is that is now my thinking that is not in harmony with the Dharma, and to kind of make the unmistaken choices in each case. So it's very important that we're able to pay attention to what's going on in our minds. Now, what is going on in my inner thinking? Now, the external conditions, that they're not the important issue here. They may, have something to do with the situation, but it's really, it's my thinking here. with the thoughts from one thought to the other, what is being decided, what is being discussed, what is being supported, and so on in my thinking. And it's to keep asking the question, is mental affliction arising, or am I free? Is my thinking free of mental affliction here? And so we can leave it there for now, for today.
And then Chinago Church condition you didn't do some your money, some. How don't that? Simply Tamil Sunday Goma to bring sing the Kavato Section. And then Nati Mani Batangal, Kacha Kazam, the same shop, and then they Kacha Kazam gave a lot of and you make you when you come to so and simply Tamil Sunday Goma, you want your mother top of chicken, some logic. And the day to body, directing when you come to so, but it's a number of target you with the Kuso doing the Chabalatena and doing it Nanka like Sugar, Rangi, Gora, Lama, number to my schedule, Lama to Obati, and Gentane, but it's a little to the Kuso to Tabuka, Niboka, Super 10 should have Sunday Kumato, but the Chesu, and Yala to my men at the Chava, what the chat. Simply Sunday Kumato, what the Chesu, so the Kumacha.
So then we begin to finish here for today, and we bring our mind again to the dissolution and the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha in the space in front. And first of all, our preparation of lotus, sun, and moon disk mandala seat on our crown with the purpose of inviting the Buddha to come there. Here we establish the lotus mandala seat through reflection on renunciation, how the cyclic existence being in the nature of suffering, the understanding that brings of wanting to attain a definite emergence from that state of mind, just that sense of renunciation giving rise to the lotus disc mandala seat, and the fact of myself then endeavoring to do this, that I lacking any objective existence, being merely imputed by thought, going through the searching for that in the body mind continuum, arriving at the point of just a mere negation of the object of negation itself, that voidness, the mind, from that mind arising the sun disk mandala seat, and then the self, this self of me wanting to attain the state of enlightenment to benefit all sentient beings, bringing forth the moon disk mandala seed representing the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. And then we recite the invocation verse thrice. O glorious and precious root Guru, come take a lotus of moon seed placed here on my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness, bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. At the end of the first recitation, the figure of the Buddha starts the journey towards our crown from the space in front. At the end of the second, arrives there. At the end of the third, they remain, we have this certainty that they will remain steadfast there until we attain the state of enlightenment. We rejoice in this and make the offerings of the 7-limb practice and mandala offering.
What the compassion? Running need the permit object, the technician, and just some time, and do the same day, some day, and running need the permit object to so such a tenant. Now, you don't do so your mind, sounds of compassion, and the Kaja Kazam never lotti, and you make him with Yakawash to so permit. And then subject Tamil or Sanjo one you want mother Tobachi, some logic in it, then to Bate, David Wakas and Yakawash to so immediate. And the parties are taking up the culture of Kusu to the Sudan. And Chibone Ma, Nabat and March and running Ninga Papeso, such a Nibaka shoot, super denture, Sajako Mato, Chesu, and then a Permatamaja Marcatu, Building Nathan Shin, they got project of Sangava Chakache Kache. And it did Tabo to Tibet Sanga title, monument, monument, title, monument, title, the Sanga Rebasum Cottage. Chiti Jambayang Sunga, Omarabasana Didi, Omarabasana Didi, Omarabasana Didi, Sunga Sasum Cotimus. Tenet, Yetama Hidama, Shamani Swat, not a Sum Cotimus. Ningu Yusu, and Nikasa, Lama Tubia over. Kusun to the Vesa Pato, Mabata Rangi Chiwan, Kantika Pala Vesa Trin, and a Rangi Lugan Nantamja, and Tama Chamne, Vesegi Chamne, and a Rangi Tomama Tigua was a Kamatu, and Socho, Majima, Misancho, Joint Tamatsu, nothing is a lot of Tabikichu, Masoneta, Bikichu, Neva, Setila Savina, Tsengama, Dingama, Toma Mevan Save, Tigua, Conditional, Pachanchi, Tabachunsu, Sasa Komacha. 다가니 신기 소다게 도마다 카와 자주스면 라바다 카와 상하게 담세다 카와 파다 말라마 그바 첨벌 로벨라마 도와 상바수마온데 구조스면 네벨 레제마 담배 최포와 파베 준들로 고아다와 심제다 네벨 레제 디바 미제 소 다기 기바 셰기 기바 셰드 기주바 다가제 셰기 제발 제수 이랑을 제바 다 간데 제바는 도나 타바다 탑디케베 계속 주변 제바 간데 싸워 있냐 와 근데 싸워 이번에는我的这个什么江西大叔，甚至我的养过熊中书，他那些留给哪吒，生给东面，俺在龙体内捐个人把江中西快慢牛把中西快牛把下，我的养过熊中书，甚至我的这呢，俺他牛都三千公万投了，他们那些捐进去一没子，他们那些捐他这讲的，刚刚他这大把人家把些吃的我养过熊中书，我的恐怕讲。
So then, recognizing then the Guru Buddha on our crown, we began the process of establishing the same seat at our own heart center, and again going through the contemplations on renunciation, seeing how it's in the nature of suffering here, how we must gain definite emergence from there, and that contemplation on renunciation producing the lotus mandala seat at our crown. The notion of a self there having no objective existence, and indeed no existence cannot exist inherently, even at the atomical level, producing the sun disk mandala seat, and that self nevertheless can have the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, producing the moon disk mandala seat. Then we again recite the invocation verse. So glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here at my heart. Keep me safe in your kindness, bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. Thrice with the first recitation. The figure on the crown begins to move down through the crown chakra, down through the central channel. At the end of the second, has arrived at the pre-prepared seat at the heart. And at the end of the third, we have the certainty that the Buddha will remain until we attain a state of enlightenment. Again, we rejoice at this fact before the petals of the lotus that fold over and are sealed at their points by the five-pronged white Vajra. And then this is surrounded by three mantras, the main mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha in a clockwise direction, the mantra of Manjushri in an anti-clockwise direction, and the mantra of dependent origination in a clockwise direction. From within, then, the light rays begin to emanate from the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha inside, and they permeate through the petals, through every pore and cell of our bodies, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, and purifying all negativities and obscurations that we've accumulated since beginning this time, taking special care of eradicating all the negativities associated with the 10 non-virtues of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, of lying and harsh speech and divisive speech and idle gossip, of covetousness, malicious intent and wrong view, of really purifying all negativities that have arisen through any breaking or fracturing of the three major sets of vows, the Patimoksha vows or the Bodhisattva vows or the Tantric vows, all the negativities associated with this life, previous life, and all lives, going back to beginningless time, such as any kind of disrespect that we have shown to our parents, right up to our own guru, and that our negativities that we have done ourselves, that we have caused others to do, that we have rejoiced in the doing of, that all of those negativities that have occurred, negativities and associated with any disease and illness to the body, disturbances to the mind, the imbalances in our in channels, winds and drops, and in kind of imbalances in the four elements of the body. These are all completely purified, and these are kind of realigned and rebalanced in our system. And you know, any kind of negativity that we have engaged in, including that which is the major obstacle to our quickly being able to attain enlightenment, this clinging to ordinary appearance, that this is dumped, and we take on the attitude of pure appearance.
Lama shaja sanga tu de lenji jigen jen su sembo lama shaja sanga tu la jusu so de lang lunga yusumda lama shaja sanga kuzung to ngo ye me jusu somsa ti tongba di dewa dewe tongba de don ni sume yi shi jesu samsam cha ane ran nya sa ge ne de ge ne ge kyen tam je den lama shaja sanga ge ne da be shi tu jusu samsam wa de kumba sha.
Then through the combination of my own more subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, together with the body of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of the Buddha. And through the combination of my own more subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is transformed into the enlightened mind of the Buddha. And thereby my body, speech, and mind have become inseparable from the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being. And that this is something that brings joy to the mind. I engage in contemplation on emptiness, which induces bliss, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and emptiness. Then the place that I am in also is transformed from any fault or stain and becomes the abode of an enlightened being, pure round.
What did it? And that round lama shajas kusu to the more ye make you a day, and nala rashi mebach. Could nala rashi mebach, what did it? Kubasha, and it did Tugane, we say part of Mebat and Simjing and Tavin about we said to Alatene, and Simjay de Tamja and Lamasha Jassing, Uncle to the more you make you so the Simjay de Dagan near Tamja and Neg Tamja Dan, Lama Shajasing and Tabish to Jusu, some such. And Simjay Tamja Lama Shajasing and Kasureta, Ukomala Gueva, teach to Susi Kawakari Tuba, to go so the Chavakanga, and you did the Tuba, Duza Yomari, some. And Tongba di dewa di tongba ten, they don't use me, she gets some such a simple shop.
And then reviewing myself as now being inseparable from the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being, and that this self now is completely lacking any inherent existence. But from this self, I sent out light rays from my heart center, equal in number to all the sentient beings. And as it touches all sentient beings, they arise so that their body, speech, and mind is transformed into the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being. The place they are in is completely freed of all thought and transformed into pure realm places of abodes as well. And that's so I am very kind of conscious then that I've led all sentient beings to this state of enlightenment. This process by which all sentient beings have been led to the state of enlightenment, the virtue that has enabled that, and I, as the agent of that virtue, completely lacking any objective existence. From that realization comes this sense of voidness, which combines with the bliss, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. And if we can maintain single-pointed meditation on that for a moment.
Dada samlo tangwa di wata di waso ta gyuchene ta kanja ngune khora ta di chene ta kanja chige kaso ngune khora dende yongye ke ane gyuri gyuwa shoos dende yongye ke ta kanja tenjen sang genjen de tewe ke ane gyuri gyuwa shoos wata na guwacha.
So, of course, when we are doing this, we know we're operating at a level of imagination, of aspiration. Of course, it can't be so easy as that, but nevertheless, this way of thinking, this way of imagining, that I make sure that I dedicate so that I can accomplish or can accumulate all the conducive conditions and eradicate all inconducive conditions to quickly making this manifest, and thus I dedicate sincerely.
What did they go at and church said that Java Tamjela to Jula Dewaton, they were Tombe Caso to Jula Dewato, they were Tombe Dewato, they don't use me, so what the
And as a result of my sincere dedication in this way, that this is cognized, of course, by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, they are seen to be pleased. From that sense of bliss arises voidness, and they abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. So if we can bring this to mind and focus on this, this is also a very auspicious and very good. So, yes, because, of course, from their point of view, what we are doing is making the supreme offering.
Gentuna, Penango Saye, Tunye, Lega, Kalibana, Dilatene, Tomba, Tomba Tingy, Loti, Dewaten, Tetonis, she gets what did it be sometimes? Because sometimes a Kabina Yore. Right, Chetamje, you didn't do a mother, Ranchik to a Cochetamje, get Ranchente, Tombani, the Samu Kabina Tansa was. Penasosa Lega Chicana, Lega D. You didn't do a marwa, you didn't do a my but legati, you didn't do a mare, you didn't do a my batinga, tea legati, and Tombang, you didn't do maringa, Tombati, the water, the Tonis may she get so some subject. Kawaii is a color gyro, so society what that did, oh, Shimuto Yabuto Kibuto, Chamjan Joy, what I Chamjan Joy did, Tombati, the water, the Tonis may she get some. Kawaii Chan. Kawaii Chan. Cousin, and Tanda Hopgal Tombani Toy or Marite, Inea, Tombani Toyeta, and it Tina, the Tonisme she. And Kege Pacha Shaturba, Katina Pacha Shatu, whichever, and Namshina, and Kalikali Kali Yombre. And it dilat and a Chatan Roshu shoot the children to what you tell me. What in the channel?
And so, in this regard, also, it's very much recommended that we employ this way of thinking, of bringing to mind the emptiness as much as we can in our lives, in our everyday lives, regardless of what we are doing, wherever we are, or whatever we are doing, that we kind of see the emptiness of the situation. From that emptiness arises bliss, and we abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and emptiness. From emptiness inducing bliss, bliss inducing the voidness, and so on. and to kind of keep that in mind, rather than when we're having a delicious meal, we think about how tasty it is, really thinking this way, that this is lacking any objective existence, is empty, is producing a sense of bliss, combining with the voidness, and abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. When we're at work, the same. We can say this work lacks any objective existence, and bring forth this sense of the emptiness of the situation, the voidness, inducing bliss, the bliss back into the voidness, and abiding in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. When we go on a journey or on holiday, the same. Wherever we are, whatever we are doing, we try to bring this to mind, and thinking, there's no objective existence here. This is lacking any objective existence, and that in itself brings forth this bliss, which kind of induces the sense of wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. So, we're not hoping, we are hoping, of course, but it's unlikely that when we gain kind of direct realization this way, but what we are doing is laying down imprints. We're familiarizing our continuum with this way of thinking, and these imprints at one time will bring forth the real taste of emptiness and ultimately a direct realization. So it's very important to kind of familiarize the mind with this reality, with reality, and this way of thinking.
장주가 셈다 아니 잡아도 제와라서 근데 론예도 다야 딱 앉아 뭐든 거주인의 고급심리 알하도도 동반이 년에 뒤 예배 로디 대화제 대외 동 대돈이 숨에 시계소서 뭐 되게 삼로 간장선은 콜라 좋아지 연주여래 아니 간장서 보다 삼로들 남예다 녜다 전에 아니 지제 동반이 예로 차도 가바이나 동반이 차도에지 저 가리인 바네 상에 가리인 바이네 그 랑시 유대는 맞고 봐라.
So that yes, it's really about really kind of conditioning our thinking in a way, and that we are looking to bring into mind the very theory of emptiness, of the mind of enlightenment, to bring the mind closer and closer and closer to making these like permanently facets of our thinking, and just to kind of empower ourselves into that thinking. And of course, otherwise, we can see how easily mental afflictions can take the mind away if we don't have it in a way occupied by these more positive ways of thinking. And so it's a question of habituating, isn't it, ourselves to better ways of thinking, and to kind of not really avoiding the kind of like the way the mind is habituated into mental affliction more and more and more. And so it's kind of the emptiness towards bliss, towards the non-dual bliss and voidness, and just to keep that into mind that everything that we have we do, we try to familiarize our mind with love, compassion, with the emptiness, with all of these kind of aspects of the Dharma, so that we come closer and closer to meld our mind with the Dharma. This is so important, and that this will, in particular in relation to emptiness, so we get some sort of ultimate taste of what actual emptiness is all about, and that and to understand that whatever thought we have anyway, whether good or bad, is empty or lacking any objective existence.
Marai Shoi Chanjo Senjo Rinpoche Ma Ge Pa Nama Ge Yurai Ge Pa Nyama Me Pa Yang Gone Gone Warai Shoi Donye Dawa Rinpoche Ma Ge Pa Nama Ge Yurai Ge Pa Nyama Me Pa Yang Gone Gone Warai Shoi Gane Rave Pave Shinam De Pendan Dewa Malu Chuve Jere Sewa Tenzin Yazo Shabe Sidi Pado Ten Yoro Je Me Me Ze Je Je Dear me, yeah, oh boy, yeah, guy, yeah, oh, yeah, Lord, shall I so Lord, shall I so
You are Avalokiteshvara, a great treasure of compassion, not ended through existence, and Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of hordes of demons without exception, Samkapa, crown jewel of the sages of landless snows, Rosendrakpa, at your feet, our meek requests.